Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And with me always is my co-host, Derek Cohen. He is the Vice President of Research here at TPPF. Well, Derek, we had a election.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, lots to talk about, lots to get to, and that is part of the politics that drives Texas. Mm-hmm. So, did you stay up late, super late, watching the returns, or you just said,
I think we were at a pretty comfortable stasis point about 10:30. So that's about when I, because being as old as I am, the bedtimes are getting earlier and earlier, and so 10:30, 11. That's about what does it for me these days.
So you've had at least 24 hours to digest all of the results, and we'll get into all those hot takes here in a minute. But the hottest takes that we want to hear from is with our very distinguished guest, the illustrious, the indefatigable Sherry Sylvester, who is our distinguished fellow here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, but perhaps most importantly, spent several years, 6-7 years, as one of the confidants, one of the chief advisors for Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. So thank you. This is the first time you've been on our show, or second time?
First time.
First time.
Great
wow.
to be here. Great with you guys, and opportunity to slap you around.
Well, that's what we like to do. That
Wouldn't
here.
be the first guest.
The other thing we're big fans of is shameless promotion. And so Sherry has, in addition to all of the things that she's accomplished in her career, perhaps the things she's probably most proud of is, of course, her podcast here with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. The Sherry Sylvester Show, the aptly named Sherry Sylvester Show, is her podcast. And then also her newsletter is Ninth in Congress. So if you're not watching those, please go to our YouTube page. You can subscribe there. And, of course, you can go on our website and subscribe to her newsletter there as well. Of course, we do some shameless promotion here. We have a fantastic newsletter that goes out every Thursday. It's called The Post. It has exclusive information. It has kind of a wrap-up of everything that TPPF is working on, as well as what we're talking about in the news, and always has something fun and super Texas-y kind of at the end. So subscribe to that newsletter at texaspolicy.com/The Post. Okay, let's get into the election results. We'll start with our co-host, Derek. What do you think the big headline was coming out of Tuesday?
Well, I mean, you look across sources from the left to the right. You even look at just kind of, I would say, neutral third-party observers who don't necessarily exist in the space, 24/7. And the banner headline has been relatively similar in that the winner has been parents because of the governor's success in entering some of the races. Now, obviously, and Sherry's going to unpack this for us as well, that obviously glosses over a lot more three-dimensional nuance that a lot of those races had. But generally, again, we've talked on this show earlier about how Abbott has been pushing all the chips in on this particular item, and I have to say that bet hit.
Absolutely. All right, Sherry, biggest headline or nuanced headline even maybe for you coming out?
Well, and in looking at the numbers, and I keep looking at them, Abbott won 11, we flipped 12, the 5 for runoffs, all that kind of thing. The biggest headline is Abbott wins. Abbott wins. And he made school choice his priority. But I believe, and he did a great job, so we've got a much better chance of passing a school choice bill. Mm-hmm. But I believe Abbott came into the election strong because he had shifted the narrative, both in Texas and nationally, on immigration by busing those illegal migrants up north so the whole country could see what's going on in Texas. Two issues important in the election, immigration and school choice, are both issues that have not been covered accurately or honestly by the Texas media.
Yep, absolutely.
They have not been covering the border for years, and Abbott turned the tables on that. The win on school choice, the polls that I've seen, a majority of Texas parents have wanted school choice in Texas for over a decade.
Oh, yeah.
And they portray it as some kind of a private school, Christian school takeover scam, and we have to read this. So it was a big win for Abbott, big loss for the media, the Texas media, who, of course, is apoplectic.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting perspective on that. Abbott definitely ran on school choice. I mean, he made a big announcement. He ran on that for his reelect, and then won by double digits, and then did a big tour, of course, last year. But it's really interesting. I mean, that's a really interesting perspective that in addressing the border issue, which has now become a major national issue, is probably going to be the biggest issue of the presidential campaign as we officially now have the nominees going forward. It really started around the time that Abbott, when he decided to do the busing, and of course everybody called it a gimmick, and everybody called it, the media called it a gimmick, and right. And then pretty soon you had, which was hilarious, which was not hilarious. I mean, it's sad, but it is sort of ironic. These leftist mayors coming out and saying, close the border. This is an outrage. We have 1,100 illegal migrants in our city when we were doing 1,100 every hour
right.
in Texas. But it is true how that then, not that Abbott wasn't already on the national stage necessarily, because the governor of Texas is always on the national stage, but certainly it propelled him to have a tremendous amount of credibility with Texans, particularly with the base in Texas Republican primary voters.
Yeah.
And you're saying that then gave him even more credibility to go out there and fight on an issue like school choice.
Absolutely. His endorsement, I mean, Abbott's been in House races before, but his endorsement in this election was the most powerful credential you could have going in. And his endorsement was linked to where candidates were on school choice, which was a big victory for us. But even when he was out on the trail, he talked about school choice, but he also talked about the border.
That's great, and you don't see that in politics a lot,
no.
right? Usually these you get all these random endorsements and things like that. Really, that's for fundraising, right? Like they'll use these as
right.
announcements to say, "See all the support I'm getting, give me more money," and that's usually kind of how they're used. But you're right. There was a poll that we discussed here, Derek, at the University of Texas, the University of Houston's poll that said 75% of Texas primary voters. It would make a difference. It would make a significant difference if one candidate was endorsed by Abbott and one wasn't.
Yeah, and I think I remember when we discussed that poll, of course, there was a lot of hemming and hawing. One of the things, and to Sherry's point, that we've seen time and time again is that whenever a piece of inconvenient information, whatever it may be, comes out for the school choice opponents, that it's always, trying to explain, hemming and hawing and trying to explain it away. And the thing is, after 6, a dozen more of these polls come out, all indicating the same thing that Sherry had been talking about choice being the issue or being in the upper firmament of the issue set, is that you just don't have a credible explanation that some of these bloggers who claim to be well-sourced use. And that tends to be one of the, I would say, the biggest talking point. And this, Brian, you're a political communications guy by trade, but you understand that one of the worst things, it's good to have talking points and keep things focused, but if a talking point gets latched on and just keeps getting recycled, it gets disproven, but they can't get it out of the cycle.
That's right.
It just stains the whole wash. And that is what the whole, I would say the parents don't want school choice. We've heard by from several individuals, both during the legislative session and subsequently on the campaign trail, that, their district doesn't want that. Now, obviously, we've seen it both in the ballot question in the Republican primary last year, 2 years ago, as well as the actual, I would say, just general outcropping of support we've seen in survey after survey, whether it's, us commissioning the poll, whether it was the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas, or whether it's at the school in Houston. All of them are all pointing in the same direction, to the point where if you're trying to explain away something that is clearly a prevailing trend, you're at the very most charitable being obfuscatory, and at the very worst just being out and out lying.
Now, for folks who listen to Sherry's show, watch Sherry's show, as well as the newsletter, and frankly all of the media hits that you do, which is sort of ironic, what I'm about to say, is that we know that Sherry's a fierce media critic, and that she
tells it to their face, though.
I know you get asked to do these panels on these from these media companies to come in and bash them, essentially, which is always fun to watch. But it's one of those things that needs to be said. It's a truth that that doesn't get put out there as much is that the media does have influence, and what they say and the way they frame things does need to be questioned from time to time. So I'm interested to know. We're going to get some of the details of the school choice stuff in the debate eventually, but I'm really interested to get your take on what you thought the coverage was like from the major media outlets here in Texas, because it was such a lopsided victory that it was hard to spin it. And I looked for a lot of the spin, but I was curious if you found any of it, or you thought, at the end of the day, the media just sort of needed to lick their wounds and say what they say and tell the truth.
The Texas media is exactly like how James Bennett in The Economist at the end of the year described the New York Times. They report about a Texas that doesn't exist, and they talk to each other. So just think of just think of the names. So this was a victory for insurgents. This was a victory for the far right. Well, if you're the majority, doesn't the fulcrum shift a little bit? I think they really were incredulous. A lot of talking about, the millions that was poured in on the winning side. I haven't seen any stories. Do they know how much was spent against these candidates?
I want to make a point. I'm going to have you keep going, but I do want to mention, I did read, there was their heads are so, in a pretzel right now. There was actually a statement where they said, and the worst part of this is that now the moderates that are left in the Republican House, or the Republican left in the House, are now going to go over to the far right. Well, if all of the moderates are now part of the far right, then it's just the right.
Right.
There's no longer a far right. If the majority of Republicans believe a certain principle or agree on a certain issue, and now all of the so-called moderates are now agreeing on that same issue, there's no far right anymore. It's just
exactly. It's a shift. It's a realignment. Nikki Haley drops out of the presidential race. I saw the Washington Post. It looks like that Trump already has picked up upper 40s of her voters, and others will decide where they're going to go. And it's a shift. It's a shift in the party, which they should be reporting. You might have an opinion about it. We all might have an opinion about it.
Right. And so I would describe this as a change election, right? I mean, because you don't have usually change elections, and this is my own sort of back of the envelope analysis, but usually change elections happen when you have either like some kind of major scandal or something like that implicates, the party or certain members or whatever. You'll have a lot of members lose as a result, or you have a change election when the voters of that body, whether it's the general election voters or the primary voters, are just kind of fed up with the way things are going. But this one was interesting because it was over an issue where they have been. It's not like they changed their position on this. It's not like they woke up one day, and saw, something happening and then changed their position. I mean, Republican primary voters have been on this school choice issue. The whole adage that there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come.
Right.
Is that kind of where we're at with this? Is the pandemic and all of the indoctrination and things? I mean, is the time has come now?
I think it is time that voters see everything that's going on in our education system, everything that's going on in our universities, all the DEI that's happening in business. I think they're seeing all of that, and they just said, no more. You can't get this passed. And the drama of not getting it passed, the 4 special sessions, Austin started looking like Washington.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened there.
Derek, in terms of issues, if you ask Texans what the top issues are, it is absolutely true that they'll say border security, and then border security. And then after that, it's public safety, and then probably the economy and inflation and those kinds of things. Education never really rises up, I think in part because only about a quarter of Texans have school-age children, have kids that have at home that are K through 12. So it's not one of those issues. 75% of the public is not, is clued in. But when you talk about education in terms of the future of Texas, that's where you start to see why an issue like school choice could then sort of be a proxy maybe or represent, are we doing the right things for our kids? Are they getting the education that they need? Are we providing the right instruction to the next generation? And maybe that's why you can see this issue becoming so important in a primary election.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yes and right there?
Yeah, allow me to yes and that, yes. Other sort of improv things we could do. But you're absolutely right. And so one of the issues, or if you look at just general valence of any particular issue in electoral politics, of anything, it's it's the same thing with, you never take your car to the mechanic to show how well it's running, right? You take it there. Well, maybe I guess if it's routine maintenance, but like if you're going to the mechanic out of schedule, it's because there's something wrong, right? So obviously, border at the top. I think we can all come to the agreement that the border is wrong at the moment. Same thing with public safety. You know, crime is on the rise. Cities are absolutely mismanaging their police and public safety resources. No problem there. And if we look at historically, specifically on the public safety thing, crime was like, say, from the late 70s to the early 90s, was that Gallup poll #1 issue. It was also when, in United States history, crime was the highest that it's ever been. Now it's kind of fallen back down the order because, again, it was largely ameliorated. You're never going to solve it, or you're never going to completely cure it, but it slid down the order. So I think that's where we're at with school choice. There are people who have testified in these hearings, and I don't think they're being dishonest at all. They're saying, I go to my public school down the street. I see the teacher at HEB. I see them at the community things, and we love our schools. And I'm sure for that individual, that is true. The problem, of course, being though that you have these absolute like horror stories that seem to be getting more and more frequent, whether it's abuse in the school that gets covered up by administration, whether it's the indoctrination stuff, whether it's, any number of issues that start cropping up. It might not be the first and foremost in the mind of the average Texan when you take, 32 million and divide by, how many of their actual in the school age. But for those individuals that have those issues, that is far and away. I guarantee some of the individuals, such as the individual up in the Plainview ISD that we've talked about with the sexual assault in the kindergarten class, ones like that, I guarantee that parent set are not terribly concerned about the border in regards to being able to get that child out of the school.
Yep.
And please.
And you left off one piece, which is that the kids can't read or write. I mean, going into those rural districts where the media narrative was, it's the rurals they're protecting. It's the rural Republicans, because most of rural people are Republican that didn't want to vote for school choice. And then as we began to analyze the test scores in those districts, math scores over half, not up. Not up to par, kids not being able to read. And that's it. This was a real rebuke to the education establishment up there, because the schools are big employers and everybody knows their sister-in-law works as a teacher aide. People know that these things are coming up there, but they're not asking. They weren't asking the right questions. Now they are. Now they are.
Some of the insiders that we've talked to now put the number of school choice supporters at 74 in the House, and that doesn't include all the runoffs that are going. With if the runoffs go a certain way, it could easily be over 76, which is the number you need to get a majority. Sherry, looking forward to the policy debate. I mean, there's so many angles on this. One is the numbers game, right? We get to 74, and I have friends that always tell me, look, Brian, on certain issues, when you get to 76, you get to 86, because there's a handful of folks who are just not going to be, the seven. They always want to be on the winning side, and so if they're going to win, and it's very cynical, but it is what it is.
When folks are walking the plank, there's never one. Oh, hey, wait for me, guys.
Yeah, exactly.
that 74th nay is a reluctant vote.
It's a rough one. So that's at least good. It's cynical, but it sort of is the way that things work. So that's kind of one example. Is like or one question for you is kind of what look forward to the kind of the legislative debate. But then even within the nuance of the legislative debate, these arguments have been going on for 3 years. They have been making the same arguments, the people who oppose this stuff. And we've had Mandy Drogan in here, and she's debunked every single one. They're misleading, they're hypocritical, they're contradictory, and they're outright lies. And all of those things have been tested the last 2 years. So when this bill comes up, as it will, what do you think the left is going to say? Like, what is the argument now? Are they going to say the same old stuff about losing money that isn't true, or the same old stuff about subsidizing private schools that isn't true? Like, how do you see and you're a Senate creature, and so you've got some opinions about the way the House does its business anyway. But moving that aside, looking forward, and thinking about what that legislative debate looks like next year, do you think it feels different? Do you feel like it's almost inevitable, or do you think they're going to fight like hell like they did again?
I think we'll see a couple of things in the continued demonization of the issue. It'll get rougher.
Oh, wow.
I think that they will begin to equate school choice with hyper-religious conservatism, because trying to get a lot of kids into religious schools. And incidents in private schools around the country, that will start making front page news in Texas. So they'll begin to look for failures. Yeah. And I think it may, we have a couple of strong, just a couple, they weren't all defeated, of strong Republicans who were reelected, longtime opponents of school choice. But I wonder if it will move, the divide will just be more Democrats.
Yeah.
The Democrats will oppose it, and it'll become a Republican issue.
And to Derek's point about 74, that's going to be fascinating too, because these folks, sir, there are a handful, a small, number of them, 2 or 3, that fought, to against school choice and then won their reelects. And so then whenever we get to 76 and then to 86, it's going to be very interesting to see kind of where they, end up being on the spectrum on this. Especially because, and the last thing I'll say on this is because we know now that this is 4 out of 5 Republicans support school choice. That was this. And so if you're on the wrong side of an issue where 80% of your party is, and you're on the losing side of the legislation, does that, that creates a lot of pressure for them in their next election. But
I was just going to say, on that very point, it becomes to the point where, nobody is, all 181 members up at the legislature, nobody's sending them up there to do signal votes. There's some that are, obviously, but largely you represent either 1/150th or 1/31st of the state, right? And so if they send you up there, and you'll just presuppose that you just think school choice is going to, outlaw football and the rural issues and, make everything worse, this parade of horribles that obviously never came to be. Even if you believe that, it is now incumbent upon you, once that threshold is crossed, to make the bill, in your view, less bad. And if you don't, if you just want to cross your arms and huff around and stomp your feet, you're not going to be at the table. You're going to be on the table at that point. Yeah. And so I think it would behoove, this is your 74 nay point. It would behoove them to actually negotiate a good bill. We have over 1,000 school districts. Everyone is incredibly unique. There are going to be nuances for, a district in District Y, in House District Y, that doesn't exist in House District X. And so being able to address those are going to require good faith negotiations. What's not going to happen is the fear-mongering, arm-crossing, and feet-stomping, and that's going to be able to shut everything down. I think those days are long gone.
If that's the way it's shifting, Sherry, do you think that there's a concern that Republicans can now overstep and maybe go even farther or create new issues that instead of just taking the win and it's funny. I got a lot of crap on Twitter for posting this, but I said before the election, I said, look, if the election goes the way that people think it's going to go, the opponents of school choice, particularly on the Republican side, are going to look back at the omnibus bill from 2023 and think, man, we should have took that, because that was ESAs with $7 billion on top of the $6 billion in new spending. That is going to look like a great bill compared to the clean ESA bill. Right, they keep saying, well, we should just divide the issue and have an ESA bill and have a funding bill. Well, you're going to get it now, and it's going to be the ESA bill, and there's not going to be any money. That's going to be a whole different debate over the money. And now, so be careful what you wish for. And I got a lot of crap for saying, oh, see, this is the hostage situation that you're taking or whatever. But my question to you is, as we're all excited about that, is there a possibility that you think Republicans could overstep here and go too far and kind of create problems for themselves where they should just take the W?
They should definitely just take the W. And do I think that will happen? No.
No. Okay.
I think that it is a realignment, and what you're going to see is what we people who understand good policy is to make sure that everything isn't tacked onto those bills, because we have a lot of things that we believe should be part of the education system. We're looking at civics overhauls. We're looking at overhauls. We're looking at math. We're looking at math. All these kinds of things. We need to not throw all that in there and get a new. We can pass that stuff with separate legislation. But I wonder. I don't think these guys are going without a fight. I mean, I don't think they've killed a dead king yet. I mean, I think that they're going to come stomping back.
Yeah, you're saying it's going to get worse before it gets better.
I think. Well, we've got in 10 weeks we've got a runoff election, and let's see what happens in that runoff election, and we'll have to relitigate all of this. And as you alluded to, we probably got some questions about leadership in the House, and that's going to be a huge war.
Right.
And this will be right in the middle of that war. New chairs. Many chairs were defeated. And
well, here's my suggestion. My legislator of the year was Tom Oliverson for the absolutely exceptional way that he handled the gender modification debate, where he took so many nasty, talk about getting worse before it gets better, so many nasty arrows in the face during that debate, and just gave an absolute master class on how to dodge and parry and get out. And I know he's not the one that's jumping out on education issues, but maybe Tom Oliverson could jump in there and at least help out with some of that if it starts to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, speaking of which, I don't know if y'all saw, but the whole WPATH thing, the organization he was critical of during his defense of the bill in the House, is basically self-immolating at the moment because, they're kind of making up science as they go.
It has been a bad week. If you follow that issue, it has been a very bad week for the folks who supported or opposed the gender modification bill. All right, so I want to get to a couple of the things, and just interesting about the election in general. One of the things we've talked about on the show before, and I've written about in my column, is the effort from the far left, so the George Soros folks, to try. There's this whole thing, and Sherry, you've heard this a million times. We're not a red state; we're a non-voting state, right? If the right number of Democrats would show up, they've got the numbers. I love your take on this, because you're always they don't have the bodies here in Texas to take over Texas. So I want to get into all that, but their contention is they do have the bodies, and if you look at certain counties where there's low participation, the lowest of the low voter participation, those are heavily Democrat counties. It's places like Hidalgo and Cameron County, and places in South Texas, even places like Dallas and Travis County and Hayes County. There's low voter participation, and if we get 10 voters out, 8 of them are going to be Democrats, and kind of that was their strategy. Put a ton of money. There were several articles about the amount of money that Soros was putting into this election, into the primary election, to try and turn people out, because the strategy is if you can get a new voter to show up in a primary, you can bank that vote in the general, right? Like 100% of those guys, if they show up in the primary, are absolutely going to show up. And so there's a good strategy behind it. Well, it completely failed. I just ran the numbers, and Hidalgo, Cameron, I think it was still less than 7% turnout there in their primary among Democrat voters, and then there was no significant difference in all the money they spent in Travis and in Dallas County. So, and
El Paso less than 1% under 30. I can link this back.
It's young voters, Sherry. Young voters are going to turn it around for us.
I can link this back to school, and the reason we've got. Did you know that in Texas, you probably did know, because the school superintendents in every district must be voter registrars, and they must assist 18-year-olds who are eligible and in public school to vote. So that's why those people who are registered to vote, they didn't go down and register to vote. Somebody came into their classroom and gave them the forms.
Yeah.
Maybe I interviewed a guy on my show the other week who said that kids are telling him they don't have enough information to vote. They don't feel like they know enough to vote. They don't understand the system enough to vote.
Well, but it doesn't matter. Here's your vote, and here's the issue, and go and vote. For
and then somebody like George Soros goes, "Oh my, we've got all these potential voters." Well, no, you don't have potential voters.
So you have registrants.
You have registrants, and again, because many of those kids are trapped in failing schools.
Yeah.
And whereas if their parents could send them to a school in their choice, maybe they could get some civics education. Understand how they want to vote.
To God's ears.
You bring up an interesting issue that popped up towards the end of this election, which was which was all of these school districts. There was all this. There was a tip line set up, and there was all these reports of superintendents and principals and all that sending messages using taxpayer resources to send messages to the teachers and everybody else. Essentially, some of them were very blatant and just said you need to vote in the Republican primary. You need to vote for these guys who are anti-school choice. Some of them were a little smarter about it, but there was a lot of it. And it all kind of bubbled up. It felt like like there was a lot of these examples that came up, and I think the AG is now up to 7 districts that he's now investigating for illegal electioneering and misproper use of public funds. Sherry, the fact that some of them were so brazen, does that suggest maybe that this is kind of how it's been working the last decade or so?
Absolutely.
And have you seen evidence of this prior to this sort of all this bubbling up?
Yes. I mean, I've been, as a grandparent, I have gone to schools and been told to vote for the bond. Been told to vote for particular candidates. I mean, you're there for Grandparents' Day, and they tell you. So they believe in the righteousness of their cause, and they are appealing. Mostly people who do vote went to pretty good schools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
So they're thinking, oh, yeah, you want to help the schools. Mm-hmm. And, I think, but I believe we're at the end of an era for a lot of reasons. I mean, school choice is an issue that we support on principle, but it also is critical to innovation in education.
Absolutely.
And this model that we've got just simply isn't working for too many kids.
And I think that's, at the end of the day, I mean, that's one thing we talk about a lot of time on the show is that we're frustrated with is that, like, we're all, I think at the very base of it, we all want the same thing, which is a quality education for the kids. It's just that, and I say all the time, the one thing that we all agree on is that if given the option, millions of parents across the state would choose something other than what their local public school is offering. Both sides agree on that. It's implicit in their argument that they're going to lose all this money because parents are going to choose something else. If they would just focus, if we could all come together and just focus on why that is, maybe we could figure out something about improving the quality of the education that the kids are getting instead of having what I consider to be these sort of second and third level arguments about freedom and choice and all this kind of stuff. But this is kind of where we're at, Sherry. Yeah. Or Derek, go ahead.
But no, and that's to Sherry's point there. That I think that's well said, because that in and of itself is the establishment, the status quo. I don't know whether they feel that there's some sort of some castigation whether or not when those kids leave that school, but it's not there are going to be kids leaving school likely because you set up a one-size-fits-all model, and even if even if it's one size fits most, it's not one size fits all. And the inability to innovate in there and the institutional inertia of that kind of bureaucratic establishment is not one, to Sherry's point, that's going to be very innovative. And again, a lot of people think this means like that the net level of education's going down. No, this doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be fewer teachers or the ratio is going to go up, more kids per teacher, or anything like that. Some of these teachers are going to find ways into these alternative pathways that work better for certain subsets of kids. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be something that satisfies those kids who weren't getting satisfied before. The teachers may very well enjoy it more. We've done preliminary analyses on actually teacher pay in these situations tend to benefit as well. And so just, again, kind of to Sherry's point, breaking that dam is going to be the value as opposed to just, shaking the boggle cube arbitrarily.
So then, Sherry, your legislative strategy is there. Do you think that a good approach would be to have multiple bills instead of just coming in with an ESA bill and saying, "Hey, we won the election. We're going to get our ESA," to maybe having multiple bills, like you said, dealing with different issues and having having different opportunities to, frankly, message maybe a comprehensive sort of education reform strategy. Maybe not a one bill, but handling really getting after education in this next round like this. It's almost saying, look, we won the big battle. We won the big fight. If we really want to fix education, let's all take a breath and say, maybe there's different ways that we can approach this other than, ESA has got to be part of that. But, there's open enrollment. There's all other kinds of issues. There's the quality issues. There's, parent involvement and transparency and things like that. Do you think that maybe take an approach like that would be?
Well, I think
lower the temperature maybe a little bit?
Yeah, and part of why you're talking is if only some other state had done this, and you could look at how they've done.
Or 27 other states.
Yeah.
But in many ways, the situation that we're in, particularly in the House, I mean, the Senate has passed school choice like 5 times. So those senators, we're just getting 2 new senators. So those senators have an idea about what they want to see. But the advantage that we have from this upheaval is all of these people who have been running are hearing from parents. So coming out of those conversations, they're going to have ideas. They're not going to come in and go, well, I want to do whatever we did in the 87, with the 27, 22. They're going to have ideas. And the fact that I think charitably we can say leadership's going to be rocky in the House. There's not anybody that's going to emerge and can say, I've got the bill, and a bunch of people are going to follow them.
I'm not touching that issue with a 10-foot pole.
No,
right
I don't
now.
want to touch it either. But I think on this issue, it's a brand new issue in many ways because before the debate was really kind of hypothetical. People were coming in and saying, my district doesn't support this. Well, we proved it does.
Yeah, right.
So now they've got to come back with a different idea. So what you're saying is great. There will be innovation in legislation and things we haven't thought of probably.
So that's a really positive approach to taking some real opportunities here. Instead of just saying, here's the ESA bill, we're going to shove it down your throat. There's a real opportunity to get a lot of other things right.
Right. Yeah.
Well, no, and that might be for the betterment of all Texas. Those who like education, savings, and count, and even those who don't. In fact, because again, you were talking about how the last omnibus was so larded up with all these other features, and it was basically, take the silver or take the lead, and they made the choice. But now it's like it's a Sherry's point, approaching with fresh eyes. You're probably going to actually see something that strikes more to the heart of that particular issue, while some of the more extraneous stuff gets dealt with other pieces of legislation.
And to that point, another angle is that some of the folks who won, who were the challengers, they're not, former mayors, former city council. They're citizen activists. They're people who went to the city council meeting and got shut down, or they're concerned parents. I mean, there's just, there's so many of the folks that are coming in who aren't coming at it from the government, here's how the
school board members.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Coming at it and saying, as a parent, here's what I'm looking for. That's got to be incredibly, let's talk about the opportunity there to put some of those folks on some of these committees and get some really fresh perspective about how the world should work, right? Like how the community and the school should work, rather than here's what the law says and here's how we fix the various regulations. It's what should be the outcome here, and how do we craft something that gets to that outcome?
And the only thing that will not change is the brick wall of the teachers' unions, of the State Association of School Boards. Those things will not change, but they're sophisticated players as well. They'll figure out how to block anything
so
good.
Talk a little bit about. We have only a few minutes left. And I want to get to a couple of things, but that's an interesting perspective now, because so much of those organizations, I mean, their reason for getting up in the morning is to stop school choice. And if now we're going to have 76 or 86 votes for school choice, what do they do? Like, how do they participate? And you've got a bill that's about transparency and about changing the quality of education. Are they going to stand up and say we don't want transparency? Are they how do you think they're going to react to maybe a set of education bills that are something other than just what they're normal? They normally just go after the school choice stuff. How do you think they're going to react, or how do you think they're going to play in all this?
Well, I mean, it's anybody's guess, Brian, but my guess is that people will that they'll continue to lie and they'll continue to fight. I mean, we've got school librarians now who say they're being fired because of book bans. And, they can't tell you what books are banned. I throw up and go, well, you're banning this book because I think this is a good idea to ban this book.
Right.
But so we'll have lots more of those stories. They'll whip up their folks and make them think they're going to lose their jobs or they're going to be sued or whatever. Yeah. I mean, I think it'll just be, they're not people that are known particularly for playing fair or for leveling with people.
So it'll just be a little bit more of the same in the sense that we'll have to fight off a whole new set of lies and
which
and all
is
that.
not to say, I mean, that there aren't folks that generally support the institution. Public education is a great American principle, but of course, school choice doesn't challenge that.
In fact, it democratizes it.
Yes.
Now, Sherry, you said you have 2 new members of the Senate coming in. can you divulge for us what the hazing rituals are for the new Senate members?
Well, aren't they both in runoff?
I guess I haven't followed it. I mean, I was just totally focused on the House. That's what I was doing till 3 o'clock in the morning.
I know the Republican is in runoff, and I believe there's a runoff to replace John Whitmire.
So you completely dodged my question there. So I'm going to go back to, let's say that there's new members. Do they have anything fun that they do to welcome, so to speak?
Yeah, clearly you don't spend a lot of time watching the Senate. Yes, and
that's all the action. You guys pass stuff over there. It takes like half a day. Nobody ever argues about anything. There's some, the Senate's or the House is where all the action is.
They do very sneaky things. I remember with one of the newer senators, you have to, before you can bring a bill to the floor, as you know, you've got to have 18 people, and they sign off on a little green card.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you've got a new member all prepared, and then they run out of green cards.
Suddenly?
Yeah. I know I had support for this. Well, and then they go and nobody remembers supporting them. What bill was that?
Oh, poor guys.
So they do a lot of play with the rules there, which are very hard to follow.
It does feel like even though it can be divided, I mean, it can be divided on major issues and things like that. Maybe congenial is not the right word. Maybe I'm looking for something else, but it's still, civil or professional or despite, them having just as difficult issues to deal with and having biggest differences as the House or anybody else in politics has. There's definitely a different vibe, as the kids say, over there.
I think it's because of the way the rules work, so that because you've got to have a number of people to get your bill to the floor, you never know who your ally is going to be. So on any given bill, Sarah Eckhart may be needing to talk with Bob Hall. And you just don't see that in the House. Mm-hmm. So you've got that. You're moving cross-party. And then I think they take the rules very seriously. You don't have the front mic, back mic thing. Mm-hmm. Certainly, we've got heroes like Brian Hughes, Lois Colcourt, Brandon Creighton, who can and do debate for 10, 12 hours, answer questions. But those are always cordial, even when they're everyone is engaged, heart and soul, on the issue. So.
That's actually a really good point, and I want to emphasize that because I think that actually is a feather in the lieutenant governor's cap, where he essentially adopts a majoritarian institution to embolden a minority, and that is the result, like an affable collegial environment. Because again, if you don't have those 18, you don't have those 18, and that's it. And so you absolutely need to go about business in a much more tactful way than bomb throwing.
You also don't see, and this is something that I can't stand about our legislature, in the Senate, you also don't see these goofy committee hearings with people dressed up like Dracula.
We've had this disagreement before.
And all this goofy stuff. Is that because the rules are different over there? Or they just, the chairman over there just don't put up with that stuff?
I'm 90%. Well, you generally find just the Senate just handles less bills as a sheer matter of, logistics. Mm-hmm. And they tend to process this a lot quicker, as well as stick to shot clocks or, testimony clocks a lot more. You essentially just see the tolerance. You mentioned Mayor Whitmire's runoff. I've been to crim jury hearings that have gone close to 24 hours. I've been in, I think the longest criminal justice hearing I've been in Senator Whitmire's, then Senator Whitmire's committee might have been 3 hours, maybe 3.5. And they got the same bills.
And nobody dressed up like Dracula.
I mean,
anything?
I was.
Okay.
But I didn't see anyone else.
Derek thinks that this shows off my authoritarian tendencies, that I want to shut down. Like, in Congress, which is, I am the biggest critic of Congress. It's totally broken up there. They don't ever accomplish anything.
Yeah, we should definitely do what Congress does, man.
Well, exactly. That's what I mean. Like, so this is the one small thing, which is, look, I don't know what the number is. Make it 5, make it 10, make it 50. I don't know. But you have to be invited. Like, you have to, there has to be some deliberate, thoughtful process where they say you represent some sort of a perspective or opinion that this is the committee is where we're trying to figure out all these issues and understand the stakeholders and these kinds of things. And 90% of what happens in the House in those committee hearings is people just coming through, either saying the same thing over and over and over again or trying to make some kind of spectacle. And then very rarely rarely do you get, somebody who actually has some perspective that you weren't expecting, or that
you're not
adds
wrong
to the debate
with that observation.
So, and again, Congress doesn't have that. Congress, you have to be invited in order to come in and speak. And so if we take anything, we take nothing from Congress, but the one thing I think at least that they would do well is the committee process.
Well, I'm not a native Texan, something I rarely admit, but I'm pretty sure it's in the Texas Constitution that you have the right to address your government.
So in Congress, you go to your member.
Is there any other item of constitutional import that we should dispense with for you, Brian?
I'm just saying that there is that in Congress, but you go to your member and you go and you argue with them, and they can't shut the door on you. They can't. There's no shot clock, to visit with your member. That's where the constituents go to their members and have those. You want to dress up like Dracula? Go dress up like Dracula or whatever. But the process of the committees is where people figure out the issues and come to try to find consensus and learn about things that you didn't know and all that. And I just think the process is not that in the Senate or in the House.
Yeah,
so
it's a mess. It's a mess. But I think you probably do learn things. And one of the things I think that is a tool. It's a tool that the Democrats use against the media, because it's mostly them.
Yeah, right.
400 people came in and testified
Exactly.
against
Right.
gender modification, gender affirming care.
Right. Yeah.
Well, so everybody must be against it. Only 20 people. You see these stories all the time. Only 20 people testified in support because they'd worked their members and they knew they had the votes and they were going to pass the bill.
Right, exactly. I think the thing they learn is that they probably need personal security after some of these hearings. Well, I did, and again, we love shameless promotion, but I did want to talk about your podcast and your newsletter, the Sherry Sylvester Show, which is, and you've been doing a podcast at TPPF for a year now, and it's different than what we do here. We have a lot of other podcasts where we talk about, we have newsmakers, or we have just policy discussions and all that kind of stuff, but you're doing something a little bit different, which I think is really cool. You're having pollsters on, and you're having scholars on, and you're kind of, so is the point that there is no strategy, or is the point that you do have a strategy and it's just incorporating a lot of different voices?
Well, I think my general thinking, and I've always looked at TPPF, which was born about the time I came into Texas. I've always looked at TPPF as sort of the source of conservative thought in Texas, and now we know it's a source of a conservative thought in the country. It's a big source, and there is a lot of conservative brainpower in the state that I want to bring into the conversation. Mm-hmm. What's your view, so that we're not limiting ourselves even to legislative stuff? Because some issues not ready for the legislature. Some issues don't need the legislature. Mm-hmm. Criticizing the media, that is so important because the media has an impact. That narrative is something we fight against. So that's what I'm trying to do, to just talk to some interesting people.
And it is interesting.
And not everybody's as conservative as everybody else, but I think this is a place where open inquiry, freedom of speech, we ought to be able to explore about anything.
And then Ninth in Congress, you've been doing that for over a year now as your newsletter. What kind of stories are you telling to your audience there?
Well, having worked for 20 years in the Capitol, which is up at 11th in Congress, I wanted to shift the perspective to here's how it looks from down here. And there I really try to work on try to write a lot about the media, but what we're looking at TPPF and give a broader view. But the whole Austin community, to me, we should shine a light on it, because these are people that have, including us, more influence than the other 30 million Texans. And so I think we should be probably pretty transparent about what we're up to and what they're up to. And
a lot of fascinating conversations, a lot of fascinating stories with both of those products. So if you're not getting them, I will definitely push those on you. Our podcast page or our YouTube page has all of our podcasts on it, including the Sherry Sylvester Show. And then you can, of course, sign up for her newsletter, which has exclusive information, stories in there that you don't want to miss. So, Sherry, thank you so much. This is awesome.
Great to be here, guys. One of my personal goals checked off the list.
Checked off the list.
We're no Cardinal and Woolley, but we're working on it.
Yeah, we're working on it. Also, the last shameless plug I'll do is, of course, at the end of the month, we have our annual policy conference called the Texas Policy Summit. And I believe it may be getting close to being sold out, so we'll see. But you can go and register at texaspolicysummit.com. Speaking of Cardinal and Woolley, who are local conservative talk hosts, they'll be there. And so they'll be recording live, or they'll be broadcasting live. We have a ton of folks from all, from experts to policymakers. The Governor Abbott will be there. Lieutenant Governor will be there. I can't, there's most of the statewide elected officials, I think, will be there. And then plenty of other policymakers and experts, and then stakeholders and folks who are affected by policies will be out there telling their stories on our various panels. Basically, every issue across the board that affects Texas, we discuss. That is March 20th, 21st, and 22nd. Again, go to texaspolicysummit.com to learn more about that. Sherry, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks,
this is
Dan.
awesome. We could probably keep going another hour, but we have to cut it off at some point. So thanks for being here. And as always, thank you for listening and for watching and for enjoying and for engaging with us on this program. As we always like to say, in the words of Sam Houston, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.